Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the iPad 8th generation and see how this specific phone or how this tablet holds up in 2023. I'm so used to making phone reviews. Now the iPad 8, I will tell you, was probably one of the cooler iPads Apple made. It wasn't the most expensive iPad, but it was a successor to the iPad 7, and the iPad 9 probably is one of my favorite iPads Apple ever made in my opinion. But the iPad 8, still a very cool iPad that came out in 2020. If you want to pick up this iPad or some iPads very similar to this one, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of the iPad 8 10.2 inch model, the first thing you have to kind of keep in mind is that this type of design, right, with the white bezel or black bezel with the pretty thick bezels around this iPad, this was a very, very common design even in 2020. It wasn't until 2018 where things started to change up a little bit. And you can remember, like back then, I mean, in 2015, 2016, 2017, all those iPads had home buttons and looked very similar to this. So even though this is about a 3-year-old iPad almost this year, I still think it looks pretty okay for the most part. You had a 10.2 inch Retina IPS panel on the front, and definitely was a pretty okay panel. Definitely was not the best panel of all time, but it was very decent, and for what you were getting here, I think it definitely got the job done for sure. You had Touch ID on the front, you had, a front-facing camera, and overall, I think if you were going to get a tablet like this, you would definitely not complain about the design, mostly because of its price tag. You have to remember that the price tag here with this, device, it's not that big. I mean, it was less than $400 when it first came out. And since then, it's gotten a lot cheaper in the used market as well. So it's not really like you're spending a crazy amount of money to even buy an iPad like this. So that's kind of another big, massive thing to keep in mind, that if you're planning on getting this type of iPad, you are still getting a device that is still, supported and still has a pretty decent display. Now on the bottom, you have the Lightning port, which is great. You have a headphone jack too, which is awesome. And on the back, you have your standard aluminum back. So nothing really ever changed here. It looked pretty much the same as really any other device for the most part, at least any other iPad. It is a single camera setup though. I know how a lot of people would love to have way more camera setups than this, but it's one of those things you have to keep in mind that every specific device can have that type of capability, and this specific device is pretty much no exception here. So from that standpoint, I think it's totally understandable of the way this iPad looks. And when you kind of look at the newer iPads, of course they have way less bezel and everything. But when this iPad came out, I thought it looked really good. And I was really happy Apple switched away from like their 9.7 inch panels up to these 10.2 inch panels, because they actually did look way better than the previous models. So from the outside, there's not any crazy cool features that you probably already don't know about, but you do have Apple, One support. You could actually get a SIM card model of this iPad too, which is really cool. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up here. Now in terms of the camera setup, it is kind of an interesting setup that we have here. So for one, we do have that back camera, which is an 8 megapixel sensor. It's a standard camera on the back, so nothing really crazy here. It just was a very basic camera. And on the front, you had a 1.2 megapixel standard camera. So these types of cameras really, like I said, aren't anything crazy. They aren't supposed to replace your iPhone. All these cameras were supposed to do, at least from as far as I know, they were just pretty much supposed to go ahead and just give you a good camera for an iPad. So if you were expecting this camera to be better than your iPhone 7 camera, that's probably not going to be the case. So if you have an iPhone 7 or newer, you are probably rocking a better camera on your phone than you're rocking on this iPad. But it's really nice to actually have a camera with an iPad, because then you can go and just take notes in class and take pictures of the notes. And even now, if your iPad supports it, like you can do live text and live video text and all that stuff. This iPad actually, I think, does support some of those features, which is really cool. So you have a lot of capability there, which is actually really awesome. So I'm not going to spend a crazy amount of time talking about the cameras here, but I will definitely tell you it's not a bad thing that this thing has cameras on it. So from that standpoint, thumbs up for me. Now another big thing with this specific iPad is actually with its, software and longevity. So like I said, this iPad came out in 2020, and internally it pretty much has the same chipset, the best way to put it, as an iPhone XR. So internally it's almost spec'd out exactly like an iPhone XR. So the performance, the chipset inside, everything, the RAM even, it's the same exact thing as an iPhone XR. Now the iPhone XR is not going to be lasting forever either, but that phone came out in 2018. That phone is approaching 5 years old this year. So with an iPad like this, I don't know for a fact how long this iPad's going to last, mostly because Apple's done a ton of different things, within software support with their iPads and iPhones that are substantially different. We take a look at the iPhone 6. that iPad, that iPhone ended up being unsupported a long time ago. The iPad mini 4 and the iPad Air 2 ended up lasting for a longer period of time than the iPhone 6, and more recently the iPhone 6s. There are iPads that have older chipsets than the iPhone 6s that are still supported with software, while the iPhone 6s is not supported with software. So it's a very weird thing. I would assume that this iPad's going to be lasting another 2 to 3 years at least, maybe even longer. This thing is kind of 3 years old this year. In September of this year, it'll be, 3 years old. So it's kind of understandable. I don't really think there's going to be too much going on here, but I'll definitely say with the features that Apple's brought in with that iPadOS 16, the last few versions of iPadOS, I definitely do think we're on the up and up for basically the amount of quality of these software updates and the amount of features we're going to be added. So from that standpoint, that kind of covers it up there as well. Now from the performance side, like I mentioned before, this thing internally is almost exactly the same thing as the iPhone XR. So with that, you have to remember that with this iPad, you are still getting an iPad that is still very, very powerful and still very capable of handling a majority of things that you throw at it. So to kind of break it down for basic things that you're going to do on like an everyday basis, you're going to be perfectly fine. So if you're doing, like standard, messaging applications, if you're going on Safari and loading through web pages, if you're watching videos, if you're going on YouTube, if you're doing stuff like that, this iPad's going to be able to handle it perfectly fine. If you take it up a notch and you're taking like notes every single day, and you're writing documents on your specific iPad, and you're doing schoolwork on your iPad, and you're doing whatever else, this iPad's going to be able to handle it too. Like there's not that much to complain about here. But even if you go into those higher end applications, let's say you're like doing some 3D modeling stuff in an app, if this is even possible, you're definitely going to notice slowdowns, but it's not going to be as bad as you would think. I think that A12 Bionic chip is very well optimized to handle a lot of heavier applications. Personally, I played tons and tons of games on the A12 Bionic, and I had a pretty good time with that chipset. I think it handled a majority of things that I threw at it, and I think those things are pretty much the main things that I kind of look out for these types of devices. So kind of going on with that, I do think that with something like a iPad 8, you're still going to be getting a very powerful iPad. It's still going to be able to be up there with the majority of things that you're going to throw at it. But I will definitely tell you, if you are planning on doing some really, really heavy intensive stuff, then maybe you want to go up to something like maybe like a iPad 9 or something. But even this one is still perfectly fine in my opinion. In terms of battery life, this thing had a 32.4 watt-hour battery. So it was a very, very big size battery inside of this thing, which was beautiful to look at. So maybe it wasn't like the most perfect battery life of all time. It's still very nice that we actually had that capability at that moment, which was also very cool as well. So from that point, I'll definitely tell you from the battery life, very good battery life as well. And to kind of sum up this video, what I'll definitely tell you is I definitely do think the iPad 8th generation is still completely worth it for sure. I think this is a very good iPad, and really no matter what you do with it, it's going to be able to handle pretty much a lot of things that you do with it at that moment. Now, is it perfect? No. I mean, like the display is 60 Hz versus 120 Hz. Maybe the panel, maybe the bezel around it won't suit a lot of people. The cameras aren't that great, and it doesn't have the latest chipset. But I still think it's a very good iPad. Like for the amount of you're going to pay for it, maybe $200 something, it's going to be a very decent iPad in my opinion. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.